technical session on Industrial Cybersecurity System Defense, What is Next, by Mr. Felipe Sabino Costa, cybersecurity expert at MOXA and ICS Cybersecurity Director, Brazil.
Hello, thanks for attending this presentation today. We're going to talk today a little bit about ICS Defense, What Next. And first, I'd like to thank you, the ICSS, for the invitation. I'm really glad to be here. And for those who don't know me, my name is Felipe. I'm engineer. I'm also cybersecurity director for ISA in Brazil. Let's start. Um, I always like to start that presentation, general presentation in cybersecurity, with the reference that I use. It gives us a baseline where we need to start any development in security. So the first thing is we need to understand that cybersecurity is holistic. It means that there are different perspectives of security that we need to consider to develop a correct cybersecurity strategy. And we have different literature, but in general, they call people, process, and technical or technology as the main three pillars or axes. So in order to have a strong and a right cybersecurity strategy, we need to develop and to consider these three pillars in our strategy. In the bottom of the page, you can see some numbers like 31, 31, and 38. And these numbers come from an assessment that I did on the EA66443 standards. And in that standard, we can definitely see how much time they invested in each of one of these pillars. So as we can see right now in these numbers, they are pretty consistent and they try to distribute equally the time among these pillars. In other words, the standard really try to cover equally because all of them are equally important. So we need to do the same in our daily activities. So with that being said, I would also like to share some of that frameworks. Here we have EA66443, look very tailored for industrial control systems. I didn't mention, but I'm also instructor of this standard of ESA in Brazil. And we have some we call vertical standards that are dedicated by vertical markets. So for example, we have 62351 that is on a standard specific for power, and we have others like NIST that is more general in EAC2443. So definitely, when you are developing a strategy, we need base this strategy on standards and frameworks that are definitely a solid rock, let's say, base for a cybersecurity strategy. So if you are a general application, I recommend 62443 and also NIST. There is a specific document for industrial control systems. And if you are in a specific vertical like power and oil and gas and maybe others, there is also other complementary standards that you can combine. So based on that conversation, I'm going to propose here some initial steps that we call defense in depth, and later, what should be our next steps after we deploy defense in depth concept. The first step that we need to do before try to implement or try to invest in cybersecurity, we need to understand what are the risks that we have in our own system, in our company. So it corresponds to the planning phase. And inside of this planning phase, we will have a risk assessment. And the risk assessment, it's definitely key. It's a process where you define what are the products that we have and what are the risks and vulnerabilities that these products have. And you try to understand from that risks, what are the most potential and impactful to your system. So we make like a list by order of impact, and definitely you know where you should start. The highest impact, you need to try to minimize and reduce, mitigate that risk to not really impact in that way your system. So the first step when we are talking about cybersecurity before after better saying, select a framework, is definitely perform a risk assessment to understand what you have on hands. And after that, it's definitely the phase where we start to deploy the defenses. That's exactly where we're going to discuss in a minute. So one important concept here inside the industrial control system in general that many companies are still struggling to deploy is the defense in depth concept. The defense in depth is definitely not a new concept itself. As we can see here, it's a picture for more or less 3,000 years representation, we're saying, right? From a civilization of 3,000 years before Christ and in Spain. And here pretty much I like this because we can see here different layers of defense, and the specialists say that the main people of this civilization are usually located in the end of these layers. So in other words, if an attacker tries to go and attack this civilization, it would face several layers of difficulty, and hopefully it would not reach that point. So the concept is generate different layers of challenge and difficulty to an attacker to avoid, to eliminate, or even to dismotivate this attacker to move forward towards inside that network or that civilization in that case. So if we translate that concept that we can see that is pretty already old, to our current topic, that is cybersecurity, we may translate it in different defenses. So the first one that is pretty common is the IT and OT, and IT is enterprise technology, and other information technology, sorry, and the OT is automation technology. So this is pretty much the two main words when we talk about cybersecurity, right? The cooperative and also the automation or operation. And with that, we have a segregation where finish one system, the cooperative, when it starts the operation. So we usually call the segregation DMZ, but DMZ is another concept where we try to avoid this direct, let's say, connections. But in simple words, we have a first layer that is exactly where finish the enterprise network and starts the operation. The second layer is the zone itself. This concept of zone starts mainly with the EC2443 and pretty much tries to consolidate the same kind of products and the same level of security in the same place. I'm going to go in details in a minute about zones. And we have a last one that is our critical access. So we may have, for example, a zone inside another zone to protect with a higher barrier our critical access. So pretty much here we can see different layers, and we translate like in the past for a concept that try to create different challenges for an attacker. So here is the general concept of defense in depth. Translated it to, let's say, current actions. Usually the first one is the hardening of the device. It's getting more popular, the certification of the 643 for products. And in general, this is one of the first standards that goes deep in details on which kind of technology and or aspects that in the standard they call fundamental requirements the product should have in order to establish the minimal security level for that specific, let's say, risk, or to avoid that specific risk. So we have here some examples. I'm not going details in all of them, but one of the perspectives is user authentication, the data integrity, and go on network and access control, authentication, confidentiality, and etc. So the standard tries to create 7 perspectives that the product should develop some protection, and all this goes in more details according to a specific security level. The highest security level, the product should accomplish more, let's say, features on any of those areas the product should have. So with that, this is the first layer to protect the product itself. and we call it maybe sometimes in hardening. And the second is exactly the creation of zones and conduits. The concept, it's pretty much approached by the standard EC, but as you can see in the right side, we have also some other really recognized as the Department of the Defense Department of US also used as let's say a baseline for any industrial control system topology. So as you can see, different colors here usually are different areas or zones where all the equipment inside that area should have the same level of security and the criticality. So it means all the products are the same level of importance in the same of the zone, in the same zone. So the yellow, the same thing, the red, the blue, and we have the equivalent, let's say, comparison here with the Defense Department. Here we have the zones, and here we have the DMZ, and firewalls making the segregation of these areas. So the concept itself, in summary, is definitely once you understand what are the risks that you have, and what are the products you have, and what are the importance for the operation, and let's say for the safety of your system, you need to group these products with the same levels. So in other words, you need to combine what is important to a specific process to keep running together. At this segregation may be physical or maybe logical. It depends, but definitely this is one work that the risk assessment we're going to support you and how to define this, let's say, integrations. Once you already define the defenses on the products, and I'll also create like layers on your network, because a huge problem that industrial control system have nowadays is what we call flat networks. That is just the first layer, like we mentioned, the segregation between the corporative, the enterprise network to the industrial control system usually doesn't have any other barrier. So we call that flat network. So it's really harmful once an attacker get access inside of the network. It definitely can do anything because there is any other defense deployed. So definitely we need to avoid that, and it cannot be accepted anymore in industrial control systems. So once you have products and the zone established, we go to the next step, that is what monitor. And all this that I'm disclosing here and sharing with you are based in frameworks that I shared with you in that beginning. So mainly E62443 and NIST controls and CIS controls are the main ones that I use it to combine that information. And to make a comparison in a very current situation, unfortunately, to us in the world, let's compare it when we call defense in depth. We are saying create barriers to avoid somebody tries to go in the network. But made the comparison with the human being body, we try to be healthy, try to eat healthy to not get sick, right? So exercise, etc. But also you are sick, definitely exercise, eat, help, but it doesn't fix the problem, right? So we need to go in another approach and another, let's say, aspect. We need to go to the doctor. We need maybe they take some medicines, etc. So the doctor will define what the best treatment for that specific sickness. So make that comparison. Defense in depth is pretty much try to avoid like exactly to eat health and exercise itself, take vitamins. But once unfortunately something passed through that defense, we need to think ahead, right? And pretty much go to the doctor, take medicine, etc., correspond in our system to monitoring and respond to that threats. So we call also this kind of approach horizontal security, and it try to answer according to the standards. Okay, if your defense design fail, how you detect it, and what you do, how you respond to that. So definitely, this is the second part. Also, the defense in depth. Definitely, defense in depth is important, as we just discussed. You need to keep doing that and updating that approach. But definitely, it's not enough anymore. Actually, for a while, just defense in depth. So we need to think a little bit ahead, and for that, I mean exactly to monitor. So I just brought here to put in perspective. I have different frameworks here, correlation, for collect data from multiple sources and sensors. I selected, for example, NIST as the main one, but as you can see, we have the correlation action and many others, very solid frameworks worldwide. So once we establish the need right here, that is, we need to monitor our system. I made just a quick comparison among some feasible topologies. And the first one, as we call passive or offline approach, we have some advantage, of course. That is, we don't need to really intercept the network. We don't let's say avoid or increases the delay of the network, because we are doing it passively and offline. So it's an obtrusive. And of course, we don't have like any higher impact, in the sense that we are not, let's say, acting on the data itself. We are just reading that and try to make the decisions. It's definitely safer in that perspective. But we have some, or let's say, disadvantage. For example, unfortunately, it may increase the network traffic, because all these devices will need to send the data to a single place. So accordingly to your specific network, how is have been used and how much it's saturated, maybe it can collapse. So definitely is one thing that we need to understand before really deploy any of those let's say approaches. And you need a specific feature that we call span, that is definitely to mirror the traffic from the switch, for example, to a specific place. And you can detect, and your system and your team can have answers for that. But definitely, if it's not really well trained, or if it's in a threat that is really quickly, let's say, to spread out, you just be able to see that, okay, I was infected, but I cannot really just after answer that and that point. So other point, that is exactly the next point, right? We may delay the response. And in the end, we just have like a network alarming, for example, as a key. And we need, again, to have a very, let's say, a team well prepared to really answer and respond as much as possible quickly that incident. So generally speaking, it's safer, but you need to have some other technical features to make it happen. And we have the disadvantage, accordingly to the risks that you may have, may be not applicable to our network. The other, on the other hand, is the active approach. So you included it in the middle of the devices, and really the traffic will pass through. So here, the advantage is definitely, if well designed, it will be able to give a good response and time manage. So I detect, for example, the threat, and I can answer it as pretty much quickly, because I can avoid this information pass through to the rest of the network. And I don't need to have anything different on the other devices, because I don't need to mirror the traffic and etc. or change configurations. I'm just adding another device that will do all the job. But what probably can be some disadvantage, and we use here the word may, because it will depend how configured and how designed is the network, the risks, etc. So it's our hypothetical scenario that we discussed, right? So, but potentially, what are some risks or advantages that we may have with this approach? Generate false positives. False positives is when the system thinks that there is a threat and blocks and or avoids the information pass through, but it was a legitimate information, and it was always wrong. They made, let's say, wrong the job. So we call that false positive. And then also we have the opposite, that is false negative. That is, the system should be classified this specific information as threat, and didn't, and the threat passed through, it failed to detect it. So we have the, let's say, both possibilities based on how the algorithm are designed and trained, and the most important, if it was designed for industrial control systems. And in the end, other point that is, it may generate additional latency. So when every time that we are speaking about industrial control system, we need to be aware of that time response are critical, availability is critical to industrial control system. So you need to be aware of what are the time that this device will take to make all the algorithms and analysis, and allow or don't the information pass through. And it definitely has time, right? That we call delay or latency. So I'm aware of that inside the industrial control system space, there is specific companies that may reach the level of microseconds, accordingly to the network or the system, the process. It is acceptable, but definitely it's a key point to analyze when you are deploying the system. So as a side note here, to minimize the, let's say, the drawback of the active approach, we incentivize you make it all the learning process and offline, and if possible, in some proof of concept before really deploy it in the real network, the operation network. It should be the last step after to do a lot of before that. And of course, we have here the hybrid approach, that is the combination of the offline and online deployment. And here, of course, it will depend how much the company accepts risks. And but usually one feasible approach is, for example, for high impact risks that definitely can go down with your network, or maybe generate a huge accident. Maybe for those, we need to train very well the system and allow it to respond, if possible, actively. And other risks that are manageable, our team have time to respond it. Definitely, we can work, for example, with offline approach, just monitoring, generate alerts. So this is one feasible. Who will define it? What is applicable for offline and online is definitely the company, with of course the solution provider. And here's just a comparison about processing and coverage trade-off. And what's pretty common, like I mentioned, if you are using just one single point to mirror all the traffic, this device should be very robust in processing perspective, because it will demand all the data in just one single point. So definitely need to have a huge processing capability. So if you were moving, for example, for two places, this process demand decrease a little bit, and we also have a different points of sensoring. And the last one is, let's say, we including several points of detection. Definitely, I need less from that device, and also I have more covert visibility, because in that points that are centralized, I will definitely need rely on the configuration, and if some information maybe is passing laterally, maybe we will not be able to see it. So it's definitely a risk. So of course, there is a trade-off here of investments, and also the risks that the system under consideration is susceptible. But we are seeing a trend here that more points of sensoring is definitely more let's say, effective, just one point, depending on how the size is the network. So to make it like a closing, what's next, right? We discuss about the defensive depth. That is important concept. After that, we need to monitor and respond to the threats, not just rely on defensive depth, and what we may expect to the future. This framework came from ERIC Advisory Group, that is a American company that is a specialist in, let's say, in cybersecurity in general as a framework. And I like this framework because they really put in steps. I know that cybersecurity is really complex and that there's a lot outside what's here on the screen, but at least give us some level of understanding which level we are based on actions, right? So this is the reason I like this kind of framework. And as we discuss here, pretty much secure, defend, contain, and monitor are the steps that we just discussed during our presentation. And they call here manage. Sometimes they also call anticipate. That is exactly the step where we need to anticipate a threat or manage the threat before it really became a risk to our system. So it will involve exactly threat monitoring and try to anticipate what are the potential risks to my system before it really became a true. So I truly believe that is the future. It is the reason I'm studying more the topic of artificial intelligence, how it can cooperate to facilitate the work for the analysts, security analysts, and managers in security, right? Because there's a huge data that should be analyzed, and definitely artificial intelligence may help us. And I truly believe that here is where we need to always have our goal, but do not forget that we need several steps already in our hands that we need to be deployed in order to think in the future, right? We need to make the base. This is the reason it's a kind of ladder. Need to make the basis to make sure that you are able to think on the next steps. So just some key takeaways here. Monitor, respond to support the defense in depth. That is definitely a must combination. Hybrid approach usually recommended. Who will define it is exactly the risk assessment based on the risks that we have and what are the, let's say, the acceptance risk that the company will allow it. And the risk assessment should always be performed. Definitely, I highlighted here several times, but I see a lot of companies that it doesn't do it, don't do it. So definitely be aware that the base for your strategy should be the risk assessment. With that, I give here my contacts, the key call to find my social media, LinkedIn. Let's keep in touch. Thank you so much for your time today.